3 ships are on fire in the Strait of Hormuz right now. As of today, March 11th, 2026, Iran has struck 3 commercial vessels within a single morning. A Thai-flagged bulk carrier is burning. A cargo ship off the Omani coast has been hit. A 3rd vessel northwest of Dubai has sustained damage. The Strait of Hormuz, the 21-mile passage through which 1/5 of the world's entire oil supply must pass, has been declared a kill zone by Iran's Revolutionary Guards, and they are enforcing that declaration with live fire. This is not a threat. This is not posturing. This is happening right now. And the price you pay at the pump, the inflation eating your savings, and the stability of every equity market you have money in are all directly connected to what happens inside that 21-mile choke point over the next 72 hours. To understand why this moment is categorically different from every previous Hormuz crisis, you need to look at 3 dimensions at once. Militarily, the United States and Israel launched a joint air campaign against Iran on February 28th. In 11 days, U.S. forces have struck more than 5,500 targets inside Iranian territory. The U.S. military has already destroyed 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels, direct evidence that Iran was attempting to physically seal this waterway with naval mines. Iran has answered with at least 7 missile barrages against Israel, plus drone strikes against Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and the UAE. Economically, oil prices surged from under $73 a barrel before the conflict began to nearly $120 a barrel by Monday, March 9th. As of today, Brent crude sits at approximately $91 a barrel, 25% above where it stood less than 2 weeks ago. The International Energy Agency just authorized the largest emergency oil reserve release in its history, 400 million barrels, drawn from the stockpiles of 32 member nations. The last time the IEA triggered a coordinated release was 2022. Iran's military command has issued an open statement declaring that any vessel belonging to the United States, Israel, or their allied nations is a legitimate target. 3 ships proved that was not a bluff, and they proved it this morning. By the end of this video, you will understand the Hormuz crisis more clearly than most analysts currently watching the situation unfold in real time. Here is what actually led to this moment. The current crisis did not emerge from a single miscalculation or rogue decision by one reckless commander. It is the culmination of a long-running confrontation, but the immediate trigger was specific, deliberate, and enormously consequential. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated military campaign against Iran. The stated strategic objectives were the degradation of Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs, and the disruption of Iran's ability to project power through its network of proxy forces across the region. In the days before the strikes began, U.S. President Donald Trump publicly offered American support to the Iranian people in removing their country's ruling clerical establishment. Tehran did not interpret that as rhetoric. Tehran interpreted it as a declaration of intent to pursue regime change. Iran's response was immediate and structural. On the same day the strikes began, February 28th, Iran's Revolutionary Guards began broadcasting VHF radio warnings to commercial shipping, informing vessel operators that transit through the Strait of Hormuz was no longer permitted. By March 2nd, senior IRGC advisor Ebrahim Jabari removed all remaining ambiguity. He stated publicly, and for the record, "The strait is closed. If anyone tries to pass, the heroes of the Revolutionary Guards and the regular Navy will set those ships ablaze." Within days, at least 4 tankers had been struck by drones. Maritime traffic through the strait, which normally carries approximately 13 million barrels of oil per day, representing 31% of all seaborne oil flows on the planet, collapsed to near zero. But the question nobody is asking yet is this. If Iran has declared the Strait of Hormuz closed to U.S.-aligned shipping, why is it simultaneously routing its own oil tankers to China through that exact same waterway? The answer to that question changes everything you think you know about who this blockade is truly designed to hurt, and who designed it, and why. The consequences of Iran's de facto closure of the Strait of Hormuz are already cascading across 4 distinct layers, and every one of them has a direct impact on the global economy you live in. The first layer is maritime. This morning, March 11th, 2026, 3 commercial vessels were struck within hours of each other in or near the strait, according to the United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations. Iran's Revolutionary Guards claimed responsibility for striking the Major Escalation, a Thai-flagged bulk carrier. Fire broke out in the vessel's main engine room. The crew was forced to evacuate. A second vessel sustained damage from a suspected projectile approximately 25 miles northwest of Ras Al Khaimah in the UAE. A third bulk carrier was struck roughly 50 miles northwest of Dubai. Tanker traffic through the world's most critical oil shipping corridor has now been effectively suspended for multiple consecutive days. The second layer is military. On March 10th, U.S. Central Command confirmed that its forces destroyed 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels near the strait. In total, the United States has now conducted more than 5,500 strike missions against Iranian targets in 11 days of combat operations. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, stated that the joint campaign has achieved a 90% reduction in Iranian missile launches against Israel and Gulf nations. Iran continues to fire regardless. On March 10th alone, Tehran launched 9 ballistic missiles and 35 drones at the United Arab Emirates. The third layer, and the one that reaches into your daily life, is energy markets. Before February 28th, Brent crude was trading below $73 a barrel. Within 10 days, it spiked to nearly $120 a barrel. Today, it sits at approximately $91 a barrel, still representing a 25% increase in under 2 weeks. Every $10 per barrel increase in oil prices historically adds roughly 25 cents to the per gallon cost of gasoline in the United States. Can global markets absorb a sustained disruption of this magnitude? History suggests the answer depends entirely on how long Iran can hold the strait closed. In direct response, the International Energy Agency, representing 32 member nations, announced Wednesday the largest emergency release of strategic petroleum reserves in its institutional history, 400 million barrels. Japan will begin drawing from national stockpiles as early as next week. Germany, Austria, and the United Kingdom have all confirmed participation. That announcement came as the third vessel of the morning was being reported hit. The emergency reserves buy time. They do not solve the underlying problem. The fourth layer is the regional shockwave. Iran has launched drone and missile attacks against Saudi Arabia, specifically targeting the Sheba oil field, as well as against Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and Oman. Dutch carrier KLM announced Wednesday the cancellation of all flights to Dubai through March 28th. A drone struck a major U.S. diplomatic facility in Iraq on Tuesday, in what U.S. officials attributed to pro-Iranian militia forces. At least 140 American service members have been wounded in the conflict to date. But the consequences you just heard are only the surface. What comes next is the part that the financial markets are quietly pricing in right now. Let us return to the open question from earlier. If Iran has declared the Strait of Hormuz closed and is actively striking ships to enforce that closure, why is it simultaneously routing its own crude oil to China through that same waterway? According to reporting by CNBC this week, Iran is continuing to dispatch tankers carrying millions of barrels of crude to Chinese buyers, even as it claims the strait is sealed to U.S.-aligned shipping. This fact reveals the true architecture of the blockade. It is not a symmetric closure. It is a targeted economic weapon, designed to inflict maximum financial pain on American allies while preserving Iran's most strategically irreplaceable bilateral relationship. China is Iran's largest oil customer. Beijing has been purchasing deeply discounted Iranian crude for years, providing Tehran with a critical revenue lifeline that has sustained its missile programs, its proxy forces across Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, and Syria, and now its capacity to absorb the most sustained aerial campaign against it since the Gulf War. Iran cannot afford to alienate China, not now. And China, importing roughly 10 million barrels of oil per day, cannot afford a full Hormuz closure any more than the West can. What most analysts miss is this. Iran's enforcement of the Strait of Hormuz is not primarily a military operation. It is a financial negotiation conducted through the barrel of a gun. The message Tehran is sending to every government in the Gulf region is precise and deliberate. Align with us, expel American and Israeli diplomatic missions from your territory, and your tankers will pass freely. Maintain your alignment with Washington, and your oil stops moving. Iran's Revolutionary Guards made this framework explicit. They publicly offered nations that expelled U.S. and Israeli ambassadors unrestricted passage through the strait. This is not chaos. This is coercive diplomacy, at a scale not seen in the post-Cold War era. Now consider what each major power actually wants from this conflict. The United States, under President Trump, appears to be pursuing a dual objective: the permanent destruction of Iran's military and nuclear infrastructure, and the political destabilization of the clerical government. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth called Tuesday the most intense day of American strikes yet. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz stated the joint campaign would continue as long as necessary. Russia has adopted a calculated distance. U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff confirmed to reporters that Russia told the Trump administration it has not shared intelligence with Iran during this conflict. Moscow's strategic calculus is not difficult to read. A prolonged conflict that degrades Iran militarily, without producing full regime change, sustains the oil market volatility that generates revenue for Russian energy exports, while simultaneously weakening a rival regional power without direct Russian involvement. China's position is the most structurally complex. Beijing is Tehran's financial lifeline, but Beijing is also a nation importing massive quantities of Gulf oil daily. Analysts at CNBC note that China can absorb an oil shock above $100 a barrel more effectively than most large economies, given its strategic reserve depth and domestic energy transition capacity. But a sustained Hormuz closure at $120 per barrel rapidly changes that calculation. Energy research firm Vonda Insights described the current trajectory as potentially representing the worst-case scenario for oil. Saul Kovanich, head of energy research at MST Marquee, stated that a sustained Hormuz closure could produce a scenario 3 times the severity of the Arab oil embargo and Iranian revolution of the 1970s, and could drive oil prices into the triple digits, while LNG prices retest the record highs of 2022. The last time the world absorbed a supply shock of that magnitude, inflation ran at double digits for years. That historical benchmark should be the lens through which every investor and policymaker is currently reading the situation. Where does this conflict go from here? 3 distinct analytical scenarios are visible. Scenario A, de-escalation. For this path to open, several conditions would need to align simultaneously. Iran would need to stand down its active enforcement of the Hormuz closure. The United States and Israel would need to pause offensive operations long enough for back-channel diplomatic frameworks to establish ceasefire terms. These talks would most likely be facilitated through Omani or Qatari intermediaries, both of which have historically served as communication channels with Iran. Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei would need to accept a negotiated outcome the clerical establishment could frame domestically as something other than capitulation. The economic impact under this scenario would be oil prices gradually returning toward $75–80 per barrel. Financial markets would stabilize, but structural risk premiums would remain permanently elevated above pre-conflict levels. Scenario B, prolonged stalemate. This is the current trajectory. U.S. and Israeli strikes continue to degrade Iranian military infrastructure at a significant rate, but Iran retains sufficient asymmetric capability. These include drones, naval harassment, and proxy militia networks across 4 countries. These capabilities could sustain disruption of Hormuz shipping for weeks, potentially months. Under this scenario, analysts at MST Marquee project oil remaining in the $90 to $110 range. Energy strategist David Roche has projected a partial reopening of the strait within 2 to 3 weeks. But the timeline is contingent on Iranian decision-making, not Western military capability. It is a projection, not a guarantee. Scenario C, major escalation. The trigger most feared by markets is confirmed Iranian success in mining the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump has already stated that if mines are placed and not removed immediately, the U.S. military response will be at a level never seen before. He also stated that Iran will be struck 20 times harder than it has been so far. If that escalation materializes, Andy Lipow of Lipow Oil Associates estimates sustained oil prices above $120 per barrel. The downstream consequences would include airline groundings. They would also include LNG price spikes. Severe inflation across every import-dependent economy globally would likely follow. These consequences would be structural, not temporary. It is also worth stating plainly that prediction markets this week were pricing in a non-zero probability of nuclear-level events in this conflict. That figure exists. It is being tracked. It does not require elaboration. Regardless of which path this conflict takes, one thing is already certain. The structural era of cheap, reliable Gulf oil as the bedrock of the global economy has been disrupted. Shipping insurance premiums have spiked. Major carriers are rerouting or suspending Gulf operations entirely. The risk premium embedded in oil's price will not return to its pre-February 28th baseline. Not in weeks, and quite possibly not in years. 3 facts from this video must stay with you. First, as of today, March 11th, 2026, the Strait of Hormuz has been declared a kill zone by Iran's Revolutionary Guards. This is the passage through which 1/5 of the world's oil supply flows. They are actively enforcing it with live strikes on commercial shipping. Second, the International Energy Agency has authorized the largest emergency oil reserve release in its history. This confirms that the world's governments are treating this as a genuine supply emergency. It is not a temporary disruption that resolves on its own. Third, Iran is simultaneously routing its own oil to China through the same waterway it has declared closed to American allies. This is not disorder. This is deliberate architecture. The next 72 hours will determine whether Iran escalates to confirmed mining of the strait. Such a move would trigger the Trump administration's promised military response. Or back-channel mediation through Oman or Qatar could produce the first fragile conditions for a ceasefire. When that answer arrives, this channel will break it down before it becomes front-page news.